Afternoon, everyone, or good morning if you're joining us from the US. I'm Karen Doyle, Operations Director of CTAM Europe. Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We're very pleased to welcome Carl Hibbert and Dave Watkins, who you can see there on screen from Futuresource. They will be both introducing themselves shortly. We're scheduled for 30 minutes, which includes time for a Q&A session at the end, so please use the Q&A button to post your questions. As always, the recording of this presentation will be posted on the members-only section of ctameurope.com. If you're not a current member, please email us at info@ctameurope.com for more information. I'll follow up by email as well. Our new dates have just been announced for June next year for our Executive Management Programme, which we hold annually at INSEAD. Also, Dave and Carl will both receive the registration list for today's webinar and may follow up with you separately. So thank you for tuning in and I'll hand you over. Thank you. Enjoy.
Thank you very much, Karen. So first of all, welcome and a very good morning and a good afternoon to everyone here. And also a big thanks to Karen and the CTAM team for this invitation for today. So we've got around 30 minutes for today's slot. And as you'll notice, we've done it in very good time for those that are interested in watching the England game. We're getting shortly, so you'll be pleased to know Dave and I have run this through many times now. We're very tight on timings, and I can reassure and guarantee everyone there'll be no overrunning for today. So, hello, I'm Carl Hibbert. I'm Research Director at Futuresource and have overall responsibility for Futuresource's data and insight programs. And joining me for today is Dave Watkins, who is head of our consumer electronics and entertainment practice. Just a quick word about Futuresource. So we've been in business now for coming up to 40 years this year. And we provide ongoing syndicated, but also custom data and insight to a broad client base, which covers the consumer electronics, the media and entertainment, and also the B2B technology space. I'm sure many of you, having looked through the delegate list, I've met previously. And for today's session, we've extracted some of our recent insight from a number of our syndicated consumer research panels, and also extracted some of the insight from our deep dive primary research programs to tackle the topic of winning out in the living room. Certainly a big topic which Dave and I have been speaking about extensively over the course of this year, and many of the events we've attended, it's been a deep dive discussion for us all. It's a 30-minute slot where I'm already taking the time, so I'll quickly rattle through this, but obviously we can only go so deep in this session. So I do encourage at the end of this session, I have put our email address on, so please do reach out via email or LinkedIn if anything sparks a thought, or you just want to discuss anything in more detail or talk more, then we'd love to engage with you further on this. So without further ado, let me hand over to Dave, who will kick us off with today's session. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Carl. Appreciate it. Thanks everyone for joining us today. Thanks, Karen, for setting up this session. Really excited to be talking to you about this topic, which we're calling winning in the living room, why the TVO OS strategy matters more than ever. So let me jump straight in. Get these slides moving forward. So here we are. Just really thought I'd start with a bit of a scene setter. I think we all probably know on this call that the TV industry has been going through and continues to actually go through enormous change. And I think looking back, perhaps over the last couple of decades, we can broadly sort of break that into three different eras. The center of gravity has clearly been moving away from legacy linear systems, that one-to-many model where broadcasters and operators would control distribution and viewers consume fixed channel lineups, and there was very limited interactivity. Then we sort of moved into the streaming focused world. So this came with improved broadband, which drove a rise in streaming apps and adoption of connected TV devices, including smart TVs, of course. We saw an explosion in content choice and competition. And now I think we're moving into this, what I call a platform-led ecosystem or era, in which the TV OS increasingly sits between the viewer and every piece of content. We used to talk, and Carl and I've been talking a lot over the years about that kind of battle for the HDMI 1 port. Well, I think what we're seeing is a transition towards a battle for control of the home screen, as whoever owns that home screen has the ability to shape discovery. They can aggregate all the users' content needs, and of course they hold the monetization levers as well. And that gateway to that audience can take actually many forms. Many households, of course, still rely heavily on an external box, be that a dedicated streaming device like an Apple TV or a Fire TV streaming stick, or an operator control set-top box. Now, that's particularly relevant here in Europe, where pay TV operators and telcos maintain very strong user bases and deep customer relationships still through the provision of broadband, bundled services, and live sports and so on. But we're also starting to see the emergence of operator embedded systems. And a great example here is actually Sky Glass, of course, here in the UK, removing the need for the set-top box entirely. And we've also obviously got broadcaster-driven initiatives as well, such as HBB TV, again, highly relevant to Europe here, where free-to-air markets remain incredibly strong. But it's really the native OS over on the left-hand side at the bottom here, the native OS that's been getting a lot of the attention recently. And this is, of course, the OS that's built directly into the TV itself. And that's increasingly becoming the default home screen for many viewers today. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the importance of that OS and why all this noise, why we're hearing all this noise about the TV OS itself. So the TV OS itself is fast becoming what I'd call a full stack media ecosystem in its own right. It actually includes many of the elements that make up a modern TV experience. The TV OS controls content discovery. You've got app stores. It controls payments, data, audience insights, and even the ad infrastructure itself. So effectively, the OS is the value chain. It's not simply a layer on top of it anymore. And the scale of these TV OSs is actually quite staggering. So according to our data, around 1.6 billion CTV devices running these TV operating systems will sit in this kind of gatekeeper role by the end of 2026. I should add that number does include external boxes like Fire TV and the Roku stick and the Apple TV as well. And some of these platforms, as you can see in the bottom right-hand corner here, individually have a pretty phenomenal scale themselves. So the likes of Tizen and Google's Android TV have more than 200 million device footprint for each of them. And it's probably unfair to make a direct comparison here, but if you think about the global reach of some of the world's biggest pay TV operators, then these platforms absolutely dwarf that. And this scale, of course, is then giving these TV OSs a significant base from which to develop their own lucrative content and advertising businesses, including fast offerings, of course. And we're starting to see a lot of that global power is consolidating around a handful of these OS owners. But, and as I will go into this a little bit more, there are some regional nuances here. There are new entrants looking to build presence in specific regions and specific countries. And then I think if we think about this, and the clearest signal yet of how strategic this tvOS layer has become is, of course, the recent Roku and Fox deal announcement. So why is this important? I think this deal really, for me, isn't really a normal media acquisition. What it's doing, it's pairing Roku's distribution, it's pairing its OS, the home screen, the ad tech, first-party data, with Fox's premium content in live news, in sport, in its free ad-supported Tubi service. So these are kind of two very different asset sets being fused together into one stack. So Fox won't just be a content company anymore, but it's a distributor as well, and it's going to have enormous real estate to promote its own services like Tubi and like Fox One. But significantly, it's also going to be able to sell subscriptions to competitor services, and of course, it's got new pathways to increase ad sales and user tracking. And it should be mentioned probably that this isn't, of course, the first deal between a legacy media company and a streaming company. But what I think it does represent is that it's a first major merger that explicitly recognizes that platform control and content control are equal strategic assets. And of course, the combined scale of these two companies is formidable. Fox obviously immediately gets access to 100 million Roku streaming households. You add in the Tubi users that are not on Roku and other services, and we're getting to a combined reach of more than 200 million households a month across the entity. Combined revenue sits at around $21 billion, even though Fox is around 16 billion of that. Clearly Roku's control of that platform gives it outsized strategic leverage as well. And the combined ad revenue reaches around 10 billion a year and growing strongly, by the way. And that gives it more than 10% share of the US ad market today. And all of this, of course, makes the Fox Roku business a top 3 player in the US market today. So I think the real prize for me here is I think for this deal is closing the loop on advertising through ownership of the content and the distribution platform. So Fox essentially is now controlling that entire funnel from discovery all the way through to monetization. It's going to control a meaningful share of ad inventory across third-party apps on the Roku platform. So it's not only able to monetize views of its own content, but also take a slice of everyone else's as well. But I think owning that OS layer is perhaps exactly one of the reasons why Roku's position at home in the US is actually been coming under increasing pressure in recent years as well. So here, what I'm showing here is the share of US TV shipments by operating system that we're tracking as part of our TV devices tracking program. And I think the headline here, of course, is that Roku has historically over the last 7 years at least been far the leader in the US market, peaking at more than 35% share of the market in some years. That share has dropped off a little bit to 30% in 2025. But clearly, you can see the attractiveness of the Roku platform to a company like Fox. But this data actually hides the fact that actually that lead is becoming more and more fragile. Following Roku's move to develop its own branded TV sets, we saw that TCL and Hisense, which were almost exclusive to exclusively using the Roku OS in their TVs, starting to switch some of their range over to the Google operating system, Google TV operating system. Then we also saw, obviously, the acquisition of Vizio by Walmart, which then led to Walmart making the Vizio SmartCast OS the primary OS for its own own brand TV displays. Again, displacing Roku from that. So it is coming under pressure. Even though it's a leader in its category, it is exposed when the OS depends on hardware retail partners and retail. And then if we sort of switch gears and to look at the European picture, again here looking at similar data but just in Europe, obviously here we see that Roku's share is much smaller. Barely reaching a couple of percent. So again, what does this Roku Fox deal mean for Roku's international or Fox's international ambitions? I think clearly there was a focus here on the US market, but there is there is potentially an opportunity here to kickstart some of that international presence for Roku beyond its core market into the UK and parts of Latin America, where the Roku channel is already performing and starting to gain share. But in Europe, Google clearly has emerged as the dominant player in the tvOS space, driven by really strong licensing partnerships across multiple brands. And I guess in Europe, a bit dissimilar to the US, we're starting to see, rather than consolidation, we're starting to see a bit more fragmentation in the European space, with new players such as TiVo, Xperi's TiVo, and Titan OS starting to see strong growth, and also Vida growing very, very strongly in recent years, having benefited from rapid TV shipment growth of Hisense, of Chinese brand Hisense, but also in addition to other third-party licensing deals that it struck for the platform. And of course, this fragmentation in the OS landscape here in Europe poses a challenge to content providers and advertisers, because they're going to have to increasingly navigate the complexities of managing multi-platform distribution strategies in order to reach their audiences. So as I talk through, the ownership of that OS level is really becoming a critical asset for capturing value. But it's content that still determines who actually creates that value, and content remains the primary source, of course, of consumer demand. And I think this is especially true in Europe, given the strength of public broadcasters, local language, regulation, and of course, a strong pay TV environment. So I'm going to hand over to Carl quickly now, and Carl's going to walk through some of the headline dynamics that we've been seeing across the different content business models.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, if you just flip me over one of the slides. And I think it's important really just to acknowledge the content angle from this, because as I say, without the content, the OS almost becomes redundant, and it really is it's the arms. If the OS is the warship, then certainly the content is the rockets to fire from it. So just starting at quite a big headline point, and I think we've all gone through enough webinars and sessions over the last 12, 18, or even 24 months to actually realize that there's now more than ever ways to watch and consume content. There's also been more types of content made than there ever was before. And I think what really, just as I say, we always want to spend a couple of minutes on each slide and one or two takeaways. But if we look here at this is, overall global entertainment spend, consumer entertainment spend, so excluding all forms of advertising, is that we have seen a shift, away from the traditional pay TV markets. If you go back to 2015, pay TV was king. It was still very much controlling both the movie and the sports rights really across the world. And even really just as we started to get to that tipping point of the pandemic and COVID, we really started to see the acceleration of consumer expenditure on subscription streaming. So when you actually look at when we buy the time of 2029, we expect that the majority share of consumer spend will be on streaming, which is no surprise, hopefully for not too many. But it's not going to cannibalize every other form of media. We still see box office, we still see transactional. I was actually at an event a couple of weeks back focused on digital transactional, and actually DVD and Blu-ray was still talked about. There's still other forms of content and media being consumed. But then on top of here, we can have a whole plethora of new, here we could talk about whether it's social video, we can talk about microdramas, we can talk about vertical video, content creator, etc. as well. So there's this wider plethora. And I think, in the absence of a really super slick, aggregation platform to do everything, it's really in everyone's, focus now from an OS perspective and potentially even a app perspective, is that how we start to harness this and how we improve the experience even further for a consumer. So I say it's certainly not a one-trick pony by any means at the moment. I would just flick on a slide, please, Dave. I'll just give you a thumbs up actually next time rather than
No worries. Hang on. There we go.
Yeah. And so we talked about there on the previous slide there about subscription on demand. We've gone through a crazy amount of growth over the last couple of years, but what we've seen from the industry as a whole, but also from our consumer research, is we are starting to see now the number of services being taken by a home start to slow. You know, if you look there, this is across a number of, sorry, this is just UK market actually. As an example, we've got this across another 12. We start to see quite a quick acceleration of the number of services being taken. But as we hit 2020, 21, this has not started to slow. And this year we've flattened out at 2.5 subscriptions. Consumers are becoming more savvy with regards to coming in and out of services, becoming a lot more savvy in terms of when content is likely to land on different platforms. But the flip side to it, you know, we all know that the global pressures now, which are on consumer expenditure, disposable income, you know, is under increased pressure with bills rising. And the average spend there in the UK is £28 a month, euros, sorry, not pounds, per month on just video. You know, when you look at that, most, you know, a lot of homes now will also have music, you know, some will have gaming, there's news. So, you know, the average home now across actually EU5 is now taking upwards of 8 subscriptions a month. And I say that's across everything, not just video, but we are starting to hit a point of saturation. So then we start to talk about, you know, the topics that Dave's already highlighted around, you know, improved advertising and ad tiers. So if we flick on a slide, good segue there to actually start talking specifically there about now the rising importance here of ad-supported plans within SVOD. And we see this now being a real key driver to being probably not the most important number anymore for SVOD, you know, the number of subscribers, but critical to maintain those subscribers, quick potential to actually monetize a wider demographic. So here on the left, this is taken from our consumer research, and this is it for subscribing households, those households which are taking at least one service at ad tier, not all services, but ad tier. We can break this down further, you know, for anyone who wants a follow-up. But it's now very, very common, you know, for consumers to be more savvy, understand the pricing a lot more clearer, and take that subscription tiers. And if we just flick on one more, the downside potentially though for the industry is we're not really seeing the same level of return and revenue realization from ad that we would do from overall subscription. But we're still looking at, you know, low bases at the moment. Netflix, you know, just under 3% of global revenue, you know, comes from advertising. Paramount and Warner, you know, 9 and 15 percentage points respectively with regards to, you know, what's coming into their businesses from advertising versus subscription and other methods as well. So lots of headroom, lots of opportunity, but obviously harder to get that scale quicker in comparison to subscription. And then I think it's really important, and I say, you know, Dave and I have probably had the fortune and misfortune of probably tracking the TV and entertainment industry now for probably in excess of 15 years. And live TV was one of those which was written off at, you know, the birth of on demand, then the birth of streaming. One of our latest consumer research from April 26th this year, and this is across EU5, UK, and US. One of the main questions we ask, and it's a question we've asked now for I think in excess of 10 years, is, you know, looking at, you know, 100 hours of your viewing, or, you know, 100% of your content viewing, where it goes, where does the time go? It's not diary, so, you know, we're not, you know, looking at measuring it to the latest minute, but we've got, you know, good indication of the accuracy here. And live TV across the market still wins out. When I say live, I'm talking scheduled, you know, EPG-led viewing, not necessarily actually live events, but it's still a prominent feature, you know, across all of these markets. SVOD, we've seen significantly catch up over the last 5 years, and so too have we YouTube, particularly in those lower age brackets. But we still consider live TV to be critical. We still consider it to have a place. And I think with some of the innovations now centered around platforms like DVB-I, HbbTV, you know, even like platforms like Freely in the UK, sort of raising the bar for, you know, our traditional and free-to-air services as well, to continue their competitiveness in the marketplace as well. But I say that I think at the moment, coming back to my original slide, there's certainly, you know, a big appetite for it. And I say, long may it continue. Next slide, please, Dave. And then just a final one, or it's kind of like a reveal on the right there, actually. So, but I'll just chat through both in one. Is we talk much, very much about FAST at the moment, FAST and AVOD, free to the consumer services. So one of the questions within our latest consumer research there is looking at the at least occasional use of FAST channels there. We've got a number listed on the left there, which are more like the multi-territory services. And as you can see, probably no surprise is that within the US, much higher take-up. We see a lot more higher awareness, and the market very much more geared to enabling and delivering FAST. But in comparison, most of those channels are actually running at under half of what their US equivalents are running at. But then when you actually look at where the power play, and the biggest opportunity sits within the EU, within Europe, it's not necessarily going to be driven by these more US-centric brands. I'm not saying they are US-centric, but the brand is much more recognised on the left. And I think it comes down to really the continued power and investment continued in the free-to-air TV services in Europe, across all markets, both a combination of both public and commercial investment. So when you actually look at the regular home market reach of those BVOD services now, most of which are now launching their own FAST channels, a number of which are now starting to be integrated in third-party apps, which start to integrate more free-to-air services together. I think within Europe we'll see a very, very different dynamic starting to explode, which won't necessarily be those global players we've talked about here and Dave talked about in the past. So I think we'll really start to see different dynamics in the UK there with specifically with FAST, BVOD and AVOD.
Cool. Thanks, Carl. That's great. I think we are running to time pretty well. So let me just rattle through sort of these summaries. So it'll be great to get to a couple of questions if we have time, Karen. So just really in summary of what we've kind of rattled through, as I say, 25 minutes, obviously, which we were only scratching the surface of this topic. So, we could speak for hours on this. First of all, I think really, we don't see a single winner here. The native OS platforms, the pay TV operators, be it the broadcasters, the streaming aggregators, we see them all coexisting for the foreseeable future. However, the market is clearly consolidating around a smaller number of ecosystem owners and gateways to the living room. So that whether that's a Fox, Roku entity in the US, NBC, and Sky in Europe, or broadcaster-led type initiative like Carl mentioned, Freely in the UK, it's clear that scale and control of customer relationship will become increasingly important. And the second point here is around while control of the platform is going to be strategically important, content remains the primary driver of consumer engagement. So premium sports and entertainment rights, of course, hugely valuable. But differentiation really comes from local content, but also, as we've talked about, the rapid growth of creator-led content, social video, micro dramas, particularly among younger audiences. And so I think leaning into these new formats and creator ecosystems is key to maximizing engagement. Thirdly, I think one major positive of all of this shift that we've been talking about to platform-led ecosystems is that the customer experience is genuinely improving. Consumers increasingly want a single integrated experience that combines live TV, it combines streaming, recommendations and discovery. Whether that's delivered through a TV OS, whether it's delivered from your pay TV operator, an Apple TV box, a free-to-air platform, the key thing is that simplification and aggregation remain really powerful competitive advantages for all these different platforms. But I think what's equally important is, I think all of this is equally important to the industry itself, because all of these new discovery tools are essentially helping industry players to better target, better targeting and better personalization down to the individual level. And then finally, I think the biggest shift that we're seeing is companies increasingly moving beyond their traditional role. So content companies are becoming platforms, platforms are becoming content companies, operators are becoming ecosystem orchestrators. And so the boundaries between content, distribution, advertising, and tech are all becoming increasingly blurred. So really, ultimately, the battle for the TV is no longer really simply about who has the best content or who makes the best device. It's really about who controls the gateway to the living room, and who owns that customer relationship, and who can combine content discovery, advertising, and data into the most compelling ecosystem. So with that, I'll stop there, and hopefully, Karen, we have time for Q&A. I know we kind of probably run just slightly longer than planned.
Yeah,
no, absolutely. You can stay on, no problem.
Yeah.
Love it. Cool. We've got a couple of questions here, so I'll start basically at the top and run down. So Comcast announced this week they will split their content from the distribution businesses. If it didn't work for Comcast, why will Fox Roku work? Yeah, I can probably. Do you want to start on that, Dave? Yeah. So I say, interesting point, and I can completely see that from my observations. I think you'll actually probably see, not necessarily even just Comcast, but we've seen that previously with AT&T as well. I think it's just as an overlying observation, just looking through some of the financials from Comcast and also tracking AT&T when that happened, is I think the finances of Comcast and finances of AT&T, very heavily or increasingly driven now by broadband distribution. And I think probably not as public as they have been in previous years, but we see broadband as a crazy high margin business, particularly when you are owning the distribution and distribution pipes, and we've seen that across many European markets as well. So I think having even spoken with some of those vendors at the time, there was just almost like a dilution of their core profits. Certainly the AT&T was at a time when we did start to see some of the traditional pay TV start to flutter a bit in the face of the streaming giants. Well, to become giants, I think at that point in time. So I think they found it a business much harder than they anticipated, and certainly couldn't secure those same margins. I think with Fox and Roku is probably a different degree of style of distribution, in terms of how and what is being distributed versus the content. So as I say, we're not saying it's a complete shoo-in. I think to Dave's point, they probably will need to start looking beyond just the domestic US market, where they're seeing increased competition. But I think there probably is a degree of more alignment of industry factors, which are probably counting towards that as a positive at the moment. But as I say, we're not saying by any means it's a shoo-in, but I think probably the dynamics of Comcast were slightly different. Yeah. But second one, how can customer experience be improving when more OS providers are self-preferencing and leaning into monetization of UIs? Prominence now to first party or highest bidder? Yeah,
that's a great question. And that is a real tension, I think, in the industry as well, when you've got a lot of these tvOS platforms that obviously have their own interest in promoting their own content, and that's clearly can be a source of tension and frustration for consumers when they're just looking for a piece of content and they maybe have to jump through. They're being pushed other content ahead of what they're trying to find, for sure. But ultimately, I think what we've seen in the tvOS capabilities of the tvOSs over the last decade, they've come on leaps and bounds. And certainly the sophistication of the recommendation engines and discovery mechanisms is like chalk and cheese, really, from what it used to be in the past to where it is today. And obviously now we're starting to see AI start to influence that journey as well for consumers. hope, the idea being that it will even shorten even further that time to access content. I think one of the interesting things that, and just thinking kind of the implications of this Fox and Roku deal on perhaps the other TV OS providers, is that there isn't, I think there is an opportunity for them to position themselves more as that sort of neutral gateway, if you like, and play on that. Well, Fox and Roku are going to be sort of interested in sort of you consuming sort of content from that entity, and so there is potential here for the likes of Samsung and Web, Samsung Tizen, WebOS, and Google, and so on, to perhaps position themselves more as that kind of neutral gatekeeper, and potentially strike more lucrative prominence deals for some of the leading streamers in the future.
Thanks, Dave. And the final question, or quite a big one, is FAST in UK a lost cause? Yeah, I'm glad it wasn't followed with just a simple yes or no will do. But from my perspective, no is my short answer, and I think the main reason being, I still think it's quite early in its infancy in terms of the the overall technology, and as a model. I think the biggest challenge with FAST at the moment is just the fragmentation of just trying to find it, and I think I counted the clicks on ITVX to actually get to any of their FAST channels, and for recollection, I think it was 8 clicks. If you don't like what you're watching, you need to go into another platform, then you probably got to exit and go through another 8 clicks. The whole beauty of what was the EPG, the whole beauty of actually what's even making Samsung improve is that it's just there. It's served up to you in linear fashion, the one that's a model which has worked for decades and decades. So I think there is enough on the horizon to think there is a good few new cracks of the whip that could enable FAST. I think probably the aggregation of FAST, which probably is certainly to the testament of the US market and the adoption there, is the integration of FAST channels from multiple providers under one roof. I think needs to be done in the UK. I think if you look at how freely can potentially develop with more third-party hardware partners, we can really start to see how that could motor. So yeah, in short, no, but it's certainly not a done deal by any means. But I think as a concept, and I mentioned before, technologies like DVB-I and how that can start to integrate, and make the consumer experience much more slicker, through a TV, yeah, 100%. I think we'll support it.
Yeah.
Lovely. Great. Perfect. I think that's wrapped up all the questions, and I am aware we're slightly over. So before I just hand over to Karen, so I think maybe just chuck the emails back on the screen, actually, Dave, if you've still got your power bar open. But thanks everyone for joining. Very much appreciated. Hope you found value in the session. As I say, Dave and myself would love to carry on the conversation more. We really only touched the surface of what is a big topic. So thanks to everyone for joining, and thanks once again to Karen and CTAM for the invitation today. So thank you very much.
Thanks everyone.
Very welcome, and thank you from me. It was fascinating, a really good session. So if anybody has got questions, as Carl just said then, their email address is on there, or you can email us at info@ctameurope.com. And it was a real pleasure working with you both on this, especially you, Carl, as a northerner, fellow northerner on the screen. Thank you very much. And thanks everybody.
It's nearly north. Middle ground.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Karen.
I love it.
Enjoy
Thanks
the rest
everyone.
of your week.
Thanks.
See ya.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye everyone. Bye.